All right, so welcome everyone. This is Erin Donovan, Interim Director for AIA New Orleans. Thanks for joining us today. This is the third in our series of storytelling with architects. Today we are hearing from Zachary Smith of the City Department of Safety and Permits in conversation with Jason Richards, a Senior Associate at EDR and past President of the AIA. A note up front about the format: all of our participants will be muted, but you can feel free to chime in through the chat or the Q&A function if you have anything to ask or contribute. We unfortunately can't troubleshoot for you since we're a very small team, but if you run into problems using Zoom, you can also just call in through the number that was provided in the sign-up email that you received. Today, we'll have a brief introduction followed by Zachary Smith and Jason Richards in conversation, with a little bit of room for a Q&A at the end, and closing with some upcoming events from the AIA New Orleans. Zachary Smith is a native New Orleanian who returned to the city after graduating from the University of Miami in 2009 with a bachelor's in architecture. Zachary currently works with the City of New Orleans in the Department of Safety and Permits. He is passionate about connecting with the professional design community and working every day to make processes for all stakeholders better. So we'll turn it over to y'all.
All right, thanks, Erin. So I'm Jason Richards. I'm basically just here to ask questions of Zach and move the conversation along. We had a preparatory call before this, so I think this is going to be a really valuable conversation, particularly given Zachary's what I guess is termed alternative career, since he's not in professional practice but has some experience doing it. For most of us who work in the City of New Orleans, Zachary is your regulator at Safety and Permits, so we'll be talking about his career. We've got lots of time afterward in the Q&A both to ask him about that career in particular, but any other questions that you might be interested in are also on the table. So Zach, I think what we'll start with the first question is just, where did your interest in architecture come from? I think while we're talking about that, if you can give us some background about growing up in New Orleans and what that meant for you.
Well, good afternoon, Jason, and thank you, Jason and the AIA New Orleans team for the invite to participate with this. And I wanted to say good afternoon to everyone attending at home or in their office or wherever you are Zooming from. It is always a pleasure to speak publicly to any group, but especially the AIA. I have a special place for you guys as a license holder who, of course, doesn't practice in the traditional sense, and everyone that I know that is a member of AIA New Orleans, the local team, really has never looked down or looked otherwise at that. It's always a, how can we collaborate and communicate and work together? It's been very enjoyable over the last decade. So I wanted to say thank you guys for taking your afternoons to kind of participate in this, and of course the welcome. So to get to it, you know, growing up in the city, I, you know, the typical where'd you go to school, Holy Cross High School, was in the city every day, really having a backbone in a historic neighborhood. You know, not even realizing it at a young age that you're in one of the jewel neighborhoods of the city, when you're in the actual Holy Cross historic neighborhood at the original location down in the lower 9. And being able to have access to a place where the residential architecture and the school architecture was substantial in so many ways, especially to the city. You know, it really has an impact with what proper design, good adequate lighting, ventilation, etc. can do, good landscaping. If anybody had ever been to the school prior to most of its demolition, it was laid out extraordinarily well with a huge amount of open space, landscaping, huge, magnificent aged oak trees. It was really just an absolute joy to be on that campus. So, you know, taking that into account and kind of a host of other things in terms of just always trying to understand how things work, how things are built, how things are constructed. It kind of got me into that launch pad for architecture. Architecture, I like to be kind of upfront and say architecture to me is something that has absolutely kicked my butt pretty hard in terms of it's something that I find challenging day in, day out. It's something that there are many things I think we're all good at. I think architecture is something that is definitely a challenge to be so comprehensive in what a project is. And that's one of the joys that I get from it, from the role that I have is being part of making something a reality. There's been some statements recently about, remembering what rules and codes and laws are for and what design is for. And at the end of the day, it boils down. In fact, Jason, I'm going to paraphrase from Jason the other day because it was shared from someone in his office. At the end of the day, the goal is to make a habitable building, to make an occupiable building. And the way in which you go about that, there's so many different pieces and parts that contribute to it. And to me, it's just fascinating how something goes from a vacant lot into something that is special, that is usable, that we in the more progressive side of things like to see as sustainable. And it's pretty much you can put a building out there that to many people means way more than just a place to go and do something. It becomes a destination. It becomes a focal point of the community. It becomes an interaction. It becomes a showcase of technology being used at the time. It becomes a way for people to start incorporating other things into their own personal lives, all from the magnificence of some structures. So it really is a cool thing, and to participate with it is I think just an absolute wonder every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think the way I put it was, for most of our clients, what they're hiring us for is to get legal occupancy of their building. So if you boil it down to it, everything we learn and all the about design, all that's incredibly important. But the value we're bringing is really delivered when we're interfacing with the people who allow us to build the buildings. So that's great. Before we jump over to your experience in architectural education, can you talk a little bit about what made you decide to want to be an architect?
So the real jump was throughout high school, especially, had really taken an interest in two things. One being construction design, more as a hobby, if you will, and both of my parents are in the medical profession, so was just, I still am fascinated with the human body and medicine and whatnot. And it kind of came down to it, I kind of mentioned it earlier, to me, the architecture is something that I didn't quite completely understand. I don't think I still completely understand it. The design, the form and the function. I think form is definitely the weakest part of the two for me, and how to work with them. So when I looked at it, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to break into a different path, and I also wanted to do something that I thought would be an absolute challenge, both personally and educationally. And so it really it really helped pull the lever when you're making these life-altering decisions at 17 and 18 years old. Said we're going to go this path, and I've really enjoyed it ever since. I think I'm right where I kind of need to be, and I know we'll talk about what the last 15 years has probably looked like, 16 years, but it's to some degree it was you got two options, and I went with one that I thought was going to be harder, and I think it absolutely was. And it today is it was absolutely the right choice.
That's well put. I think about that often. This career, no matter what path you take, always presents you with new challenges, and sometimes they're a little bit familiar but different, but often you're essentially learning something every day. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that's true. I'm sure that's true whether you're designing or doing things from the other side of the table, for sure. Well, you left New Orleans after you graduated high school. You went to the University of Miami in Coral Gables. Talk a little bit about how your experience there influenced your sensibilities as an architect and about your education broadly.
So generally speaking, you know, I didn't really understand the program and a lot about the professors at the school until I had already arrived. And a lot of people don't realize this or see it. New Orleans has a connection with Andres Duany and the firm DPZ, Duany Plater Zyberg. The dean of the School of Architecture was Ms. Plater Zyberg. So whether you liked it or not, between not only the style that they preached, not only the product that they cranked out, you know, I call myself a Duany Plater Zyberg little new urbanist, in that the only thing I couldn't get up well from that school really was mastering watercoloring. It's something that I will always leave that to people that just do it better, because it's just not in my wheelhouse, and I try to avoid some things that are just truly impossible for me. But the school, the education, I thought was spectacular, in that it opened me up to many parts under the same program. You know, in the beginnings of theory of architecture and whatnot, and really trying to understand what are we building buildings for? You know, not just when did we start building this, not when did this person build this, but what are we really building it for? You know, kind of started to hit these synapses, if you will. Perfect, I think a good example, and I'm probably jumping a little bit ahead, but professionally, you know, I've had different takes on things like blue roofs for buildings and for underwater storage tanks under buildings, because specifically I can go back to why did a human come out of a tree and build a building or build a structure, and it's to escape water. And so I have a very, I think, rooted fear of water, from the sense of not putting it on top of your building, as it's, to me, a roof is meant to shed the water, not to hold the water. And I know that many might disagree with that, but it generally serves me, because I go back to literally a 7-person theoretical class, talking around the library table about these just kind of off the wall kind of comments that at the time seemed like they were absurd, and then they carry with you. The other parts to it, you know, the new urbanism, having a staff and a faculty that to get collectively designed and constructed Seaside, Florida, and having every member of your faculty who's a published author with books and buildings that you can actually see, I think served me very well to kind of get a better sense of what the school was about, what they're trying to teach. You know, things that I think all schools were teaching, but you're really starting to see come to light. You know, I started college in 2004 and graduated right during the economic destruction of the 2008 collapse. But the things that we picked up and the things that were real drivers about walkable communities, et cetera, have really come to the forefront in the last decade. And really trying to reconnect with those historical norms that make for a healthier city. And we see it now with the way in which architecture, you know, can make or break health patterns. You know, a completely designed city can actually be productive and be healthy. A fragmented, segmented building plan can create disastrous results. It can get lucky, but it can be absolutely disastrous. And it gives me a better appreciation for some of the historic creations of urban societies, where you do it with a real plan, not just on a whim. And it's one of the reasons why we love looking at really good things, because it was, you know, planning makes it.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a lesson I learned of being an architect here immediately after Katrina. Is like project after project, going to see a building that was built sometime after 1960 or 50 at grade that flooded, and the thing that's next to it that was built 50 years before that, emerged generally okay. I think we all learned a lot of lessons along those lines.
It comes back to, it goes to a personal philosophy, and it's very possible this personal philosophy is highly related to the same stuff we just talked about. I strongly don't believe in buying the first generation of the iPhone or the first generation of anything. You got to let it play out and see what it is, because the people before us, to your point, that historic structure was built and developed along a set of rules that people lived by, because that made or break them. It made or broke them. They didn't just adopt to adopt. They were grounded in, we want to push the envelope, but we have to be grounded in reality, so that we don't have exactly that, where we're forcing, for the easy build today might be disastrous later. And that's perfect. I mean, we are so lucky that we still maintain a very deep sense of our relationship with water, specifically flooding, to where we do, it's relatively easy to convince people to raise their homes. It's not only the law, but it's just the norm. It is the architectural norm. So it helps that people don't feel out of place to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. I have a personal curiosity about your education, because as we talked when we were preparing for this call, when I was at the University of Kentucky, we also had a new urbanist dean, David Money, and there was always this tension between the old line modernists and the new urbanists. And I think that's old news, because that was started 20 years ago. But did that exist at the University of Miami?
I think there is always a generational, and a generational doesn't have to be in terms of people's individual ages or anything, but it is a generational gap between what style you go through. And there were quite a few professorial factions between classical, between different types, different time periods, and also different schools. I would say that my faculty was divided 50-50, Harvard PhDs and Yale PhDs, and it always made for an interesting outlook due to architects from the last 40 years. What school did they graduate from? Maybe they were a little bit more important in somebody's eyes than another one. So it's strange how people have developed a relationship to a personality or to a style, and then also some of those underlying things. But yeah, there's always a soft edges versus hard edges. What's the better relationship? What do people better see? What do people better experience? And I am amazed. I've been pretty much on the northern face of City Hall for the better part of a decade, and I look out across Duncan Plaza, which has been in the news a lot lately, and it looks down past Loyola and all the way down to the high rise in the east, going out into the east. And I love to see aerial photographs of New Orleans from the 50s, when they tore down a train station to build the new train station. They tore down all sorts of stuff to build new City Hall. And some of the most modern, advanced little buildings for their time in the city of New Orleans have some of the most classically laid out site plans and non-orthogonal grid, with this kind of vista, this grand vista that they're going for. And it reminds me that there's a lot of different things out there, but at the end of the day, they all share that same sort of language, which is how do we accentuate what we're building, and how do we make it special? And people can claim one building is one thing, but it absolutely pulls in, what was the term in school? Imitation's the best form of flattery.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is constantly taking something else, and they'll write books they'll debate about, this is not this time period and this is this other period. But at the end of the day, all the buildings are essentially the same. It's a place, it boils down to it, for people to occupy, hopefully enjoy, being safe to be in. And you'd appreciate a good attractive building for people when they walk in and when they walk out, and say that was a pretty cool experience. Not just I got my business.
Yeah, that's an amazing observation. I never thought about that. I'm always approaching City Hall, driving down Elks Place, Loyola, and you get that amazing vista of the building. What is that? That's like Haussmann's Parisian boulevards from, the 19th century. It's really not that much different.
I would strongly recommend for people to go look at City Hall pre the Poydras Street developments, pre the Superdome. You got to remember, City Hall was around for 20 years before the Superdome was finished.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing on Poydras. Most of what we know as our downtown was built in the 80s with the oil money. So City Hall was this really just kind of out on an island. Pretty much it and the Pythian were the only thing there. And when you look at it in these grand kind of things, it's like, well, this definitely is some sort of European, historical nod, because this is a grand plan. Of course, that got infilled over time. But yeah, you come down from Canal Street and you have City Hall, and of course the lights never working and the letters are a little off, and so people get attracted to that. They get caught with the red lights and whatnot. But it really is something that 60, 70 years ago, somebody planned out, not in a modern way. And it's one of the reasons why the building is so noticeable when you're driving, because you just all of a sudden you turn the corner and bam, there it is. It kind of surprises you. And
yeah, absolutely.
It really is neat.
Yeah, that's great. It's fantastic. So you went through your architectural education, and you, like me, were graduating right around the time of a recession. Why don't you talk about how your career started, what it was like graduating and moving back to New Orleans, and how all that evolved, sort of leading to you beginning to work with the city?
So the history of that transition, I actually kind of like the story, because it ends with me working for the city. And I've, so far I'm about 10 and a half years in with the city. And it has been an extreme joy to do. The, what was it? The 2008 crash, really kind of rocked everybody, and things were starting to come off the wheels a little bit before that, but 2008 obviously is history. And 2009, spring of 2009 was graduation day. So I was in a very interesting position, because the University of Miami is very similar in many ways to what people here would know as Tulane, a smaller private institution, kind of a little school with a big name of sorts, heavy draw of student population from the Northeast, along the Atlantic seaboard, with New York, New Jersey, your Philadelphias, etc. And I was, school had started in the freshman year. I think we had 130 students in the school, in the class. And by senior year, we were down to, I think, 30 something had remained. And at that point, you started kind of jumping into the people that were doing their master's programs. And because unlike Tulane, we didn't have the 5 years, get both, the dual degree. So I was pretty much the only student that was never stressed out or freaked out about what I was going to be doing after graduating, because for the 3 summers prior, all post-Katrina, I had been interning at a place called Wink Engineering, directly cat-a-corner to City Hall in the Energy Center, every summer with, it's a huge engineering firm. It was a huge engineering firm, and with a very small outfit of architects that historically weren't in the office, so they were growing the architecture. Wink Engineering did a hell of a lot of petrochemical industrial design. A lot of how to get the oil from one thing to another thing, how to exhaust stuff, very, 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 very intense, heavy stuff. In fact, one one of my summers I spent walking around the Chalmette refinery, trying to document which buildings were more susceptible for injury in case there was an explosion. You know, not exactly what I thought I'd be doing in the middle of summer, walking around in head to toe Nomex and sweating very profusely, but definitely learned something about something I would have never come across. And so I was always very sure that for that entire senior year, that it was all ready to go, all ready to roll, because anybody practicing at that time, things were a little shaky, but the New Orleans market, in my opinion at the time, was definitely improved over any other market out there. Katrina money was really starting to flow, 06, 07 were kind of the acclimation to it. There's a lot of programs that exist now in the country that didn't exist at the time. So you're talking about new federal programs, federal ways to get money that were building up. 08, it kind of starts. Case in point, there's an SQ Dumez Ripple building, 930 Poydras, which I think was one hell of a gamble at the time. For the folks listening, if you're not familiar with 930 Poydras, that's the Gibbs building, the black box with the projected lobby that comes across Poydras with the Johnny Sanchez and the Jamba Juice in the bottom of it. So again, that was built 12 years ago. There was a gamble on downtown, and it's because people were starting to see, wait, these things are about to start hitting. And, the amount of schools that started getting permitted in 2009, 2010, I mean, it really kept the New Orleans economy, I know I'm preaching to the choir with many of you, insulated. So, I never had, for economic purposes, any doubt that I would be employed upon graduation. And graduated on May 8th of 2009, got a call on May 1st of 2009 to effectively say that the Wink Engineering Group was being sold to a out-of-state firm who was more interested in the projects and the relationships and the clients than they were with any of the hundreds of engineers they had on the payroll. So I was effectively fired before officially hired. And, I always, anybody that's dealt with me directly knows that I'm always going to find the positive side of it. I was very happy to be fired before I had bought a house, a year in, or had some substantial debt. It's much easier to know you can't spend it than to spend it and then know you shouldn't have spent it. But so I kind of piddled around for about a week and a half, was completely crazy. Basically a family friend had asked me to come help him run and organize his construction office. And then from there, kind of got a call saying, Zach, there's this job as an entry-level plans examiner for the city of New Orleans. It requires an architectural background, and everything else will be on the job. We really think that if you can do it, you'll probably be running the show in about 5 years. And I think it was 5 years and 2 months I was running the show. So it has really been since then, it's just been such an enjoyable and sometimes interesting roller coaster. But that's effectively how I transitioned from school into the city. It was completely unexpected. If you had said in college, oh yeah, you're going to be working for a municipal government, I would have absolutely thought it was crazy. And this kind of forced a hand, and it turns out, most, I'm not going to say what I think about it. I'll say what I think most people think about it, is that I'm quite effective, as a civil servant. And I've enjoyed literally being able to save projects from failure, speed things up. Sometimes we are more successful, sometimes we're less successful, but it's been an absolute joy to work with so many people and also be the center of everybody's universe. I tell people of my age bracket, oh, you got out of school and you went and worked for X firm. So how many architects and designers and contractors do you know? I said, that's sometimes my recruiting pitch when I try to get them to come and be plan reviewers, is come put in a couple of years and you will know everybody in the industry that you might want to work in, and you can pretty much name your own place if you're good. Now, at the end of the day, if you're terrible at your job, we'll probably get rid of you and you won't be hired. But it's turned into a very good sales pitch for many people that really do at that time have an interest in pursuing architecture themselves, because wait, look at this, it's working for him and it can definitely work for me. Here I am, not officially really not practicing in New Orleans, and I'm doing a presentation, you know, for the AIA New Orleans, you know, case in point.
Yeah. This is a story I don't think I relayed to you when we talked in advance, but I remember first hearing of you when Jack Sawyer, who sits with you in the BBSA from SQ, came back, I guess, from a meeting or off of a phone call, and he said, there's this guy at the city, his name is Zachary, and he's making me confirm that all of the exterior walls in my Type 3 building, this is a project at Trinity, don't have any wood in them. Mm-hmm. And it was this sort of notion that, okay, firstly, there's somebody at the office that knows what they're doing. That sounds good. And then like, oh boy, it's time to like up your game and make sure you're being diligent. So, yeah.
I still remember that building, the pink building. That
Mm-hmm.
was mixed construction types, and unfortunately, if it's mixed, it's got to go with the.
It got unmixed, I think, is the way we
so
said
it was
that.
unmixed.
Yeah.
We worked out a way to unmix it.
Yeah, indeed, very cool. Well, as anybody who's on this line who is a licensed architect knows, there's a certain amount of experience you need, not necessarily in this state before you take your AREs, but you know you've got to put your hours in. That's obviously a challenge for you as somebody who is working for the city. Can you talk about how you got over that hurdle and ended up eventually getting your license a few years ago?
So luckily I had been interning with Wink, which is now kind of an offshoot, which has been offshot into Wink Design Group. I'm sure people are familiar with Ron's outfit. But the long and short of it is it was the ARE 4 at the time, and the last version, memory kind of slips on this one of which set of rules it was. But essentially you had to have your 6,000 hours of experience. And out of that, at the time, it was approximately 4,500 hours or so had to be done in a Type A setting, which is with an architect in the real traditional sense of architecture. You could get, then there was a Type B, which is like working with an engineer, practicing engineering. And then there was essentially like a Type O, which was you're working with an architect in a related field, but not in the day in, day out practice of architecture. So I had the internship through school, so I was able to add those up and make a significant dent in those hours. And I was lucky that we had a gentleman who was the building official for a long time, Bola Dume, who was a licensed architect as well. He had actually had a somewhat similar career path in terms of a non-traditional path to architecture and licensing that I had. And he was able to act as the professional where, I couldn't get hours in certain categories. I couldn't, I was very, very diligent about making sure that everything was cataloged. But I can tell you that code review and code research, which I think was a category at the time. I think it's been blended since then. I could have sold them on the market for how much code research I had hours for. So as I was getting close to the end of the hours you could have with that experience, I reached out to my director at the time in the city and had a frank conversation and said, look, my passion really is with the city. I don't see myself as an architect, capital A, anytime soon. It's not a driver for me right now. The government service, working kind of doing the type of job we're doing now really is the passion. And this is something I need to do for my own professional career, which is to get that license. So I've talked with a couple of folks, one in particular, who is ready and willing to hire me part-time enough so that I can get the weekly minimum. You know, I'll basically be working 2 days a week for them, which means I'd have to be out of the city. And of course, I don't, you know, what can we come up with a flexible work schedule? So the director at the time, Parabascos, who came after Paul May, was very open to it, understood the issues, appreciated the conversation, appreciated the research, and was able to bless that, was able to then take that blessing and go to the state ethics board as I'm, you know, working in public service to make sure that working for a private architect who might also occasionally do work with the city, you know, would not be a conflict. So we worked it out. We worked out a plan. We worked out a supervisory plan, and it gave me the opportunity to then work. I think it was 3.5 years working part-time to accumulate the remainder of the hours necessary, and you know, picked up some traits, picked up some things of things I would never want to do in a career, quote unquote, if I practiced. You know, window detailing in CAD is just not something I think I was put on the planet to do. But it was a great team. It was a great team of architects. I actually kind of saw there's an architect in the firm, it's Broadmoor Design Group under Dean DePlanche, and there's an architect who was really good at writing specs, you know, and actually seemed to enjoy it. And you know, it comes down to you know, architects and licensure opens up so many doors for so many different paths, and it's going back to that base of there's 1,000 different steps. There's more than 1,000 different steps to build a building and to have a building constructed between design and the actual execution. And you don't have to, you know, you don't have to do what everybody dreams about in high school to actually be a legitimate designer, legitimate planner, legitimate architect. It's again a showcase that even within a practice, a professional practice, there's many people that are better at many things, and then they take those on. So it was nice to see. It was nice to see that there are, you know, so many different ways you can contribute.
Great, that's awesome. Can you talk a little bit about because we talked about this as well. I remember. Because I think you and Jenny got licensed in the same year. I remember the ceremony in Baton Rouge that the state does, that you went to go pick up the little benchmark that they hand out for people that are recently licensed. In the context of the AIA, can you talk a little bit about what the AIA has meant to you as a person working outside of the profession, and why you see it's valuable?
So the AIA has some extremely important you know, returns on investment, that a couple of them are pure satisfaction for, you know, I'm never opposed to talking publicly about just about any topic. And so it's one of the reasons why I really enjoy these invitations to talk about things in the profession, or talk about ways in which I contribute to the profession. I've met so many architects that I've just known kind of through email correspondence, and then you kind of sync up with them at a lunch and learn, or you sync up with them in a more in not so much the traditional city hall versus designer way, and it helps to soften, you know, those edges. I find that good expectations of that communication have just helped out tremendously. Also, you know, whenever somebody knows the face to the name, there's a benefit. When you have more of a connection to someone, you know, people generally are a little bit nicer. Case in point, and that goes two ways. That goes from your planner viewer to you, and from you to your planner viewer. But you know, and I know I can't hear people comment on this right now, but I've had, in my experience, I've had you know, some selfish reasons for being in the AIA, for being an AIA dues paying member. And one of them is how many times, especially an out of state, out of area architect will call me as the building official or as the director, and will start the conversation with, well, I know that you know what you're doing because I saw that you're an architect. And AIA, is that universal, okay, they're a licensed person. They went through the same hell that we went through. I think I'm smart, so this person must be somewhat on the same page. And it really, I can make as many self-deprecating architects think they're the world jokes. But there's a truth to that in any profession. If it was an electrician talking to somebody who had generic, background, or somebody who had an electrical background, they're going to treat them with a different level of conversation, and they're going to feel a little bit more at ease because it's somebody who they know understands the basics of it. So literally having the letters behind my name has softened conversations that otherwise seem like they would have started out very negative, because it would have been oh, well, I'm talking to somebody that has no clue what they're doing because they must be a 65-year-old ex-contractor who turned into a building official, rather than, oh, well, it's a building official who happens to have a history with architecture somewhere in there. So it's been very beneficial. But from the social side, from the career networking, from the ability to get the job done better, I think some people have found, anybody that's worked with me, I hope finds that I'm very approachable and not a typical bureaucrat, if you will. But there are some people that haven't had too much experience, and then they see me at one of these types of events, and then they'll come and they'll catch you after and approach you and talk about something, and then it really softens that stance for that next email communication. To kind of go to this point, it's not people that are in the AIA, but we were proactive. I think I had just started with the city in 2009, and I think it was the summer of 2010, we had a design group, really a drafting company, that would continuously make the same mistakes, or they'd leave out on every single project they did. And they were probably doing a dozen projects a week, especially with the housing boom that was taking place in New Orleans in 2010 and 2011. And that was the pre-llama days. It was where everything was paper correspondence, double, you had to submit your two plans. Everything had to be in sets of two. And there's a gentleman, Alan Macgillivray, who some of you may remember. He's currently living in Maine, just as an update for anybody that knows him, and enjoying his retirement. But we had an idea and said, well, let's call this guy. Let's call him and tell him that we think that he can do a better job and incorporate these things into the plan, and then save us the time of having to make the correct making the notes, putting something in an envelope, mailing it to him, waiting that amount of time, him having to make corrections, billing a client, putting it back in the mail, sending it out. Because at the end of the day, we failed, he's failed, his clients failed, everybody's lost money, everybody's charged more money. And it was taken so well. We were a little nervous that we were going to offend somebody. It was taken so well that we took time out of our day to do that. It's one of the reasons why I've been I never try to pass up an opportunity to interact with groups like this or anybody. I do the PRC classes for the how to renovate your house right and the importance of permitting and things like that, because if you make yourself more approachable, you will be approached more. It is just a thing. You might not be approached the way you want to all the time. You might not be as successful as you want, but you will become more approachable if you put yourself out there. And it's the same sort of thing. People can have that dialogue with us. They can start giving us that critique. Do you know, if you did this, it would make it so much easier for me to help my client. And we want to do that. The big goal of the last decade has been, how can we make that system faster? Because we know that you guys are busy doing stuff. We know that your developer cohorts are busy doing stuff. And at the end of the day, the person who just wants to get in their house and move out of the apartment on time so they don't have to waste another month's rent, or they have the bank hounding them to get this thing done, or they're already, they're already a year into the financing on that construction loan. the longer we delay, the more money, the more pressure you have in your life. And so we want to soften that as much as possible. And sometimes the only way to do that is to have a better relationship with the people we're working with, and to make sure that people know they can reach out to us and give us feedback. And I think the AIA has really been successful with that in the last couple of years, specifically of, hey, how can we talk to the people that we work with day in, day out, so that we can come to a better understanding in kind of a softened way to hopefully have some good positive outcomes.
Yeah.
So, very exciting.
Yeah, it was just a few years ago that we started inviting people like you and the HDLC folks to the design awards. I think for a lot of members that went a long way to kind of personalizing the people that you interact with on a regular basis. So whether we keep doing that digitally for a few years or however all that pans out, we hope that that's something that we keep up for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's too easy to not do.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, I want to save some time for Q&A, so I'll maybe ask you one last question, and then we'll break. I'm going to guess, Erin, that people will submit their questions in the chat box. Does that sound correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So if you have any, you can start formulating them. The last question I'll ask you, Zach, is you graduated in a time of economic uncertainty, and we're moving now into a time of some great economic uncertainty. What words of advice would you have for anybody who may be listening to this now or in the future about how to fashion a career out of difficult times?
You could have just left off the word economic for uncertainty, and it would have painted a better picture, I think. The biggest thing is to make sure you don't bypass any opportunity. You know, there are folks that when I was earlier on in City Hall were very just intrigued. Family, friends, people that worked with me. Oh, well, you're going this way. You don't seem like you, quote unquote, have a real, again, doing details of windows. So why are you even wasting your time getting your license? And I say, because it's an important part that I want to get. It doesn't necessarily make me do my job better to some degree, even though I learned a hell of a lot studying for those tests. And that some of that trivia, I'll call it, it'd be one hell of a bar night trivia for AIA. That might be a next social hour when the Corona pandemic rules are lifted. Reading random questions from the mechanical electrical test and see who can remember what. But it's making sure that you never close a door, you never burn the bridge down. From the young side, specifically to what I do, I can tell you, I see a lot of people that continue to be turned off by the profession. They continue to be turned off by the process because, and this is my philosophical belief, that schools have to do more to teach practice. And I know that there's only so much time in 10 semesters. There's only so much you can do. I think theory, as I started out the conversation, literally theory has kept with me on certain ways in which I carry out my interpretations of things. And they're sometimes guiding paths, but at the end of the day, it's the practice that I think is the meat grinder for a lot of people. It's the oh, we can't actually build that because we've never thought about a budget. We've never thought about constraints. We've never thought about rules. We've never thought about time. We never thought about codes. At the University of Miami, I don't think I'll be honest, we spent one semester having a comprehensive studio, and I put the air quotes up there, and it was a stab at it. I remember we talked about fire exits for an afternoon, and we remembered that through the whole, story for the semester, but it really was kind of the thing. Oh, there's some mechanical stuff here, and it's about this size, and just don't worry about it. We'll figure it out later. And I think the figuring it out is really the hard part of the puzzle for a lot of people that are, not so much function, but they're more form. And so if we really want to be challenging, we have to have the form and function both taught. And I think that, I say it to people who might have people that are at Tulane or other schools or have influence, and say, we continue to I think, set people up for not quite as good a success as we'd want them to, because they get hit with that smack in the face of, oh wait, I can't just put the cars on the 20th floor? No, you can't put the cars on the 20th floor. That makes no sense. And there should be a limit, especially as it graduates through school to that point. Once somebody's out of school, really learning the process, really learning the basics of how government works. There's no portion of government that if you are a successful architect, I think you can avoid. Whether it be the straight up immediate regulatory authority, which is the permitting office or the development office, etc. But when you have clients that are having complex financing schemes through bonds and tax things, not understanding what those are and just pushing them off keeps people too narrow-minded in a project. And it goes full circle back to theory. One of the greatest parts of my architecture history was twofold. One was really learning about some of the just geniuses of people with our, Vitruvius, Palladio, etc. And understanding that, in order to kind of know architecture, you have to know everything, or aspire to know everything. And again, architects, we all know know everything all the time. So I don't know what the challenge is, but again, the aspiration to do that. And it brings me to, I think I shared with you last week, there's an architectural historian, I believe the biggest name in architectural history, Vincent Scully. And he was a professor of mine. I took his last lecture class at the University of Miami ever, he just became a little too fragile to continue to make the trips. And just the way in which he would describe and literally recite poetic verses about buildings and then tie it into how this relates for the people at the time, using his own photographs, just complete passion, like 110% passion about the topic. And here he is, great example. How many buildings does he have? What did he build? That's not his contribution to architecture. Somebody who's literally in front of me from the very beginning, which prior to the second semester of the school, I didn't know who the guy was. And you leave his class and you're like, man, this is why there's people from the community that are coming to this class on their free time, because they understand who he is and what he can bring to the table. So it's to make sure you open yourself up to as many opportunities, as many examples as possible. Do not think that, oh, this is beneath me as an architect, especially if you're newer, you haven't established, that track yet. Learn your plan reviewer, learn how the government works, these are basic civics things that probably apply to everybody, but again, architects got to be better than everybody. We want to be smarter than everybody, we got to be better than everybody. And, learn what the Board of Zoning Adjustments is, learn what the City Planning Commission is, learn what the Historic Districts Landmarks Commission is, the Vauquerets Commission, know who's on the panel, know who these people are, what their backgrounds are. Go on to Granicus, the website, and watch a couple hearings. Too many people, they get turned off because they're bored with it. Some of these things are absolutely fascinating in a weird kind of government way. But when you turn yourself off to it, you don't understand how to do it. And Jason, when was the last time SQ built a project in the city of New Orleans that was just straight up permitted by right? You could design whatever it is, whatever came out of your head, you could put it on paper. The guy had all the money, or the developer, he or she had all the money to build it, and nobody stood in your way, and it just, bam, that idea just happened.
I would say that never happens.
It never happens, and it never will happen. It never will happen. It's lightning in a bottle here, and you're not going to do it a second time. You got to have a really, really, really fancy, really rich person in a remote, secluded place that they own the entire world. And so that practice, I think is something that we have to make sure that we're pushing our peers who aren't the new architects to say, we really need to get some people onto a realistic plane here. Because then we're just setting some people up for a little bit of failure. But to the same point, too many new designers have a fear of opening it up to something else. So it's a twofold approach. You know, people have to be okay to experience everything, because without it, we're going to be just producing the same thing over and over again. And luckily we have some fantastic architects in this city. I can't speak for all the cities because I don't know them, I don't study them and see them the way that I see y'all, but there are some fantastic architects that even do some buildings that I don't particularly appreciate, but are still spectacular and amazing in their own ways. You know, they just have that some objective qualities that are just spectacular.
Yeah, there's this great thread that's run through what you were talking about sort of in the middle of our conversation. We got onto education about collaboration and how important it is to collaborate. And I think that's one of the big things I've taken away is hopefully we can get a little bit more of that in schools. I'm not very in tune to it, but you see it happening a little bit more, but it seems like the key to success in the profession, no matter what path you take, is knowing how to work with other people, essentially.
Knowing how to work with other people, even if you're right, keeping your mouth shut sometimes. If you're wrong, knowing that you should always keep your mouth shut. And again, you know, I've been trying, and I think we're close to getting it off the table. You know, it's not just a customer service training for some folks, for, you know, department-wide, literally the entire 7th floor. We've had it in the works for a while, and of course, you know, the nature of the department, I think everybody who's at home or in the office watching knows we've had a particularly eventful last 12 months. So some things have just been delayed. But, you know, I still am very passionate and optimistic that we're going to get some of this on. And it's not just the basics of customer service, but a program that I want to push out is basics of what, you know, I don't want to call it development, but what development is, you know, so that we can better understand the shoes that the people across the table from us are in. You know, I briefly scratched the surface. Yeah, somebody might lose their temper and scream at you, but if it's the 29th of the month and they've kind of hinted that there's a family at home that they're trying to move, you know, from apartment into a house to save that, would you want to waste $1,600 because somebody couldn't move the thing a little bit faster or respond to that email, or is just being a stick in the mud? You know, that on a nutshell is some of the easiest stuff to get around. That gas meter, that electric meter. But these complex things. I mean, I think there's a lot of people on this meeting that are probably progressive in a lot of ways. And the developer with a capital D is not an evil person. You know, there are people that can do bad things, but a developer with a capital D at the end of the day pays the bills. Why are you an architect, you know, and not doing something else? You have a passion for it and somebody pays you to do it, you know? So it's kind of having that, you know, empathy is a bad word, but just basic understanding of what the other people in the arrangement are doing and where they're coming from, you know, because it's why we I know I'm kind of going a little political on it, but it's why we generally just don't talk to people, because everybody, you know, I'm a genius and everybody else is dumb. No, everybody has their part to play in the thing. And in architecture, I think is the perfect example, because how many people, I mean, most people in your office have multiple years of experience. You know, architecture is a whiter collar, you know, office environment. You know, you got your fancy ceilings and your shiny mechanical equipment, but the people building the building are really out in the mud and in the, you know, in the rain and the elements. Both are extremely integral to the building being built. Without one, the other one can't work. You know, the other one is useless. So knowing that, okay, look, we're all on the same page, we're all doing something different, is extremely important. And collaboration, as to use your word there, is paramount. Without it, your project's never getting off that piece of paper, and people are going to stop paying you for it because it's going to go nowhere.
Yeah.
Hey there, this is Lauren. We do have a quick question. We're pretty much out of time, but I wanted to make sure we got to this. Someone asked, A lot of local design work involves working with historic buildings in situations that don't always mesh with modern building codes. What are your thoughts on best approaches to these situations?
So let me reiterate that so I get it right. Basically, historic buildings can be a real challenge to design because you might sacrifice historical pieces and parts and to the building in order to make it code compliant. Is that effectively what that question is?
I think so, yeah.
So the biggest advice I could give anybody is have a frank conversation with the building official after doing your homework. And the reason I say after you do your homework, because we are humans, we have a general assumption that you know what you're doing, especially with that license. You know, oh, it's a licensed architect or engineer. You can pretty much do anything you want in this state when it comes to a planning department, you know, to permitting department. But when you come and ask questions of us and you are ill prepared for the question, it then starts to chip away at that expectation of you know what you're doing. And the perfect example would be when it's an open-ended question that's kind of like, and I like these kinds of questions because I like to use them as, for me, my soapbox and how to educate and talk about something. But historic buildings, you know, I would say specific to this so that there's a little bit of education with it. Historic buildings have sections in the code. They're in the building code. They now no longer have the historic chapter in the building code. They've graduated it out completely to the existing building code. People have been practicing know this section. They got rid of it. They took it out because it was too short and didn't have enough information. Plus, the International Code Council really wanted to sell a separate book, so they got to make a new book. You know, it's a whole thing. It's quickly, every year over year, it's getting eventually to the same size as the real book. But historic buildings, if you go read the section on historic buildings, it's one of the most open-ended citations in code that basically says if your building official is cool with it, you can do it. So there is nothing, you know, and there's a caveat, you know, unless there's an inherent life safety risk or something, you can do it. So for instance, staircases are probably the most visible thing that people have, because staircases 100 years ago are definitely not the staircases today. I don't think it was that people didn't trip as much, but you know, I guess maybe people 100 years ago did pay a little bit more attention to where they're going. They didn't have cell phones in their hand. But we'll get people that will come and ask us and say, oh, it's a thing, what can I do? And it's well, if you've read the code, show me the equation in your mind that says why you think that this is not a bad thing. You need to give me, in your professional opinion, why this is safe. Or if it's questionable, what are you going to do to start weighing that and equalizing the balance to make it as safe as possible? So there was a case in front of the BBSA yesterday, and they were coming for a couple different things, but it was specifically about 8 separate staircases in a building where none of them were compliant. And because of the nature of the building, we ended up sending it to the board. But the designer did everything possible to make and retrofit the stairs to be as safe as possible, with very few actual things. They definitely didn't, in my opinion, take away from the historic nature of the stair and what the architecture of that space looked like. So there's to the question, there's pretty much a blank canvas of how you answer a code problem on a historic building. And I would say, go read the section in the existing building code. There's a whole chapter, or a whole section, article, specifically on historic buildings. And it effectively is boiled down to one paragraph that says you can do whatever you want as long as it's safe and the building official agrees to it. So do the homework, do the equation, break it down into what is it, what should it be, how much off is it, why do we think that this is not going to kill anybody? And let's go have a conversation about it. And that we can then talk about. If we just get well, I have a stair and I want to keep it, well, that tells me, you know, we we haven't engaged in a real dialogue about the code because it's just a one-way question. And I don't know about your building. That kind of goes to a slight other point. And I know we're running in time here, but you got to remember too, I know everybody on this call is a visual person, you know, that's literally the profession that you guys have gone into. You have to remember that the plan reviewer, the code official, the contractor, they may, in many cases, have never, and some of them will never visit this site, see what you're talking about, know what you're talking, know your experience with it. They'll see the you know, they might get lucky with a two-dimensional drawing, but they never know what the lead up to that stair is, what the condition at the top is. The more information you can really provide, the better results you're always going to have. It just naturally comes with it. When it's in the back of my head, it's in the bottom of my gut. And the architect or engineer has a clear grasp of what is going on, we're always going to naturally feel more comfortable with working out a solution, you know. And I hate to say that there might be something that is treated one way one time and one way another, but as all of you know, there are architects with more professional integrity and less ability to blur safety rules and regs, and there's just, you know, people are better at their job than others. And when we see that, we're gonna deal with it better and give you more of our time. So I would say, understand what that rule is and take that very vague comment that the building official can effectively bless anything in the building, and give us a roadmap to how we can get you to a yes. Because most of the time we can. Most of the time we can, or we can get you to a path. There's very few times we completely unequivocally say no, not a chance in hell. And even when it is, the code's absolutely not in your favor, I can't remember the last time I spoke against something in a BBSA appeal, because we work with the designers to come up with something that is an acceptable equivalency. So there's I would say 99% of the time when there's a realistic, grounded question, we can find a realistic answer to get you moving forward so that project is successful.
Great.
All right, well, thank you so much. We are coming up on time here, so, or we're past time, really. We did get another question, but I'm gonna go ahead and send that separately to you, Zach, if that's okay.
Whichever, I got time, so.
I think we will go ahead and close up.
Sure.
But yeah, thank you so much, Zachary. Thank you so much, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
We really, really appreciate having you guys here. To everyone who attended, thank you so much for attending. And please consider coming to our next storytelling webinar. It's going to be next Friday with Kathleen Gordon.
All right.
Thank you
Aaron
again.
and Lauren.
Thank you, Jason,
You guys
Aaron,
take
and
care.
Lauren. And thank you, everybody at home and work for attending. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you all and stay safe.
Likewise.